Cops slap black woman in court. Moments later, she sits in the judge's chair. The courtroom was supposed to be a place of justice, but on that day, it became a stage of humiliation. A black woman, calm and dignified, stood at the center while officers tried to silence her presence. In a shocking display of power, one cop struck her, the sound echoing like a gavel of cruelty. Gasps filled the room, yet no one moved. What happened seconds later, however, would rewrite the meaning of justice. Before anyone could process what they had witnessed, the very woman they tried to break walked toward the judge's bench, and the entire courtroom froze. The woman at the center of it all was not a stranger to hardship. Born and raised in a community where opportunities were scarce and prejudice was constant, she had grown used to navigating life with quiet resilience. Every obstacle she faced became fuel for her determination. Every slight, another reason to rise higher. That day, she was in court not as a criminal, but as an advocate. She had come prepared, carrying files that told the story of families wrongfully evicted, of people denied dignity, of laws bent against the very citizens they were meant to protect. The courtroom itself was heavy with formality, the polished wood benches, the elevated judge's chair, the intimidating seal of authority looming above all else. People whispered as she entered, some curious, others dismissive. She was used to that too. Many saw only her skin color, not her years of education, her commitment to justice, or the quiet fire that drove her. But tension hung in the air from the moment she walked in. Her presence seemed to challenge an unspoken order, one that preferred silence over truth. Officers stationed in the room exchanged looks, their stances stiffening as though her very confidence posed a threat. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't disrupting, she was simply standing tall, ready to present her case. Yet her dignity seemed to spark discomfort, a reminder to some that power could not always dictate respect. The moment was fragile, like glass under pressure. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing that something was about to happen. No one could predict how quickly the line between authority and abuse would be crossed, or how her response would change the course of that day forever. As she took her place before the court, papers neatly stacked in her hands, there was an undeniable weight in the air. The judge's gaze was cold, scanning her like she was already guilty of something unspoken. Whispers circled the room, not about her evidence, but about her very presence. It wasn't just a case being heard that day. It was a silent test of how much dignity one woman could hold in the face of scrutiny. She began presenting her documentation. Each page detailed patterns of discrimination that had gone unchecked for years. Families displaced, wages withheld, neighborhoods targeted by laws that seemed designed to keep them powerless. She wasn't simply reading facts. She was exposing an uncomfortable truth that many in power wished to bury. The tension in the room grew thicker with every word. The officers, positioned like guardians of order, shifted uneasily. Their eyes narrowed, their hands tightened on their belts. It was as though her words themselves were a threat, though all she carried was evidence and conviction. When she raised her hand to emphasize a point, one officer stepped forward. His movement was sharp, unnecessary, a signal of authority trying to eclipse reason. The judge looked on with indifference. There was no rebuke, no reminder of courtroom decorum, just silence, allowing intimidation to bloom unchecked. The woman's voice trembled for a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of being constantly challenged, constantly doubted. Yet she pressed on, her voice regaining strength, her posture unyielding. That defiance, calm yet unwavering, seemed to ignite something dangerous. One officer, impatient, stepped closer. The room fell silent, all eyes watching as tension reached its breaking point. Without warning, the sharp crack of a slap shattered the stillness. The sound reverberated through the courtroom, bouncing off the polished walls, searing itself into memory. Gasps erupted, people rising halfway from their seats, some frozen in disbelief. The woman's head turned with the force of the strike, her papers scattering like fallen leaves across the floor. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. But instead of collapsing, instead of retreating, she straightened her spine. The sting of the slap burned across her cheek, but her eyes carried no defeat. She bent, collected her papers calmly, each movement deliberate, as though reclaiming every shred of dignity they had tried to strip away. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain now. What was supposed to break her had only revealed a deeper strength. The judge still said nothing. That silence was louder than the slap itself, a silence that validated cruelty, that permitted injustice to masquerade as law. The crowd's unease grew into outrage, though muted, cautious. No one dared raise their voice in a place where authority stood armed and ready. In that fragile pause as the woman gathered herself, an unspoken shift began. The courtroom was no longer simply a stage for her humiliation. It was becoming the ground upon which power itself would be tested. What she did next would decide whether she remained a victim of the system or redefined the meaning of justice before everyone's eyes. The sting of the officer's hand still burned on her cheek, but it was not pain that filled the room. It was power shifting, silent yet undeniable. For a heartbeat, the courtroom froze in the aftermath of violence, the air heavy with disbelief. The officers stood rigid, waiting for her to break, for her to crumble into the role they had forced upon her. But she did not. Instead, she rose with a calm that unsettled everyone. Each step she took seemed to echo louder than the slap itself. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, deliberate and steady, carrying her not back to her seat but forward, toward the bench. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some leaned forward, others covered their mouths, afraid to even breathe too loudly. The officers hesitated, their hands twitching but uncertain. This was not the reaction they expected, not the submission they had counted on. The judge, still seated, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his authority draining away with every second of his silence. The woman reached the steps of the elevated platform. For a moment she paused, gathering her scattered papers and holding them tightly as though they were a shield of truth. Then, in one unflinching motion, she ascended. The wood creaked beneath her weight, the sound breaking the court's suffocating stillness. When she turned, she did not look like someone who had just been humiliated. She looked like someone reclaiming what was rightfully hers. She placed the documents on the bench with care, then lowered herself into the judge's chair. Gasps broke out across the room. The very seat that symbolized ultimate power, reserved only for those sanctioned by the system, now held the very woman the system had tried to silence. For the first time that day, she commanded silence not through fear, but through presence. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, over the officers who struck her, the judge who failed her, and the crowd who witnessed it all. She did not need to raise her voice. Her very act was louder than any verdict. The message was clear. They could strike her body, but they could not strip her of dignity, truth, or power. In that moment, she became more than a woman in court. She became the embodiment of justice itself. The image of her seated in the judge's chair lingered like a scar in the minds of everyone present. It was not the act of defiance alone that silenced the room. It was what it represented. In a single gesture, she exposed the hollowness of a system that claimed to uphold justice, yet stood idle as injustice unfolded before its eyes. The officers, once brimming with authority, now appeared hesitant, their earlier confidence slipping into unease. They had expected submission. Instead, they witnessed transformation. The judge, whose silence had allowed cruelty to flourish, sat diminished, overshadowed by the woman who dared to take the very seat that defined his power. The crowd remained still, some fearful, others inspired, knowing they were witnessing something that could not easily be forgotten. Her presence in that chair was never about replacing the judge or defying the law. It was about revealing a truth. Justice is not defined by uniforms, badges, or titles. It lives in the courage of those who demand it, even when it comes at a cost. By taking her place on that bench, she reminded everyone that dignity cannot be granted or taken away, it must be claimed. When she finally rose and stepped down, the room seemed changed. People would leave that courthouse carrying the memory of her strength, her refusal to bow, her ability to turn humiliation into empowerment. For some, it was a story of discomfort, a reminder of their silence. For others, it was a spark of hope that one act of courage can ripple far beyond the walls of oppression. And so the question lingers. When faced with injustice, will we remain seated in silence, or will we dare to stand, to rise, and to take our place where truth belongs? Her story is not just hers. It belongs to everyone who has ever been silenced, struck down, or overlooked. It is a reminder that power without justice is empty and that the fight for dignity is never wasted. Because sometimes, the boldest act of justice is simply refusing to stay where they expect you to be. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, and let others feel the power of standing tall against injustice. Hit the like button if you believe dignity can never be taken away. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss more stories that reveal truth and inspire courage. And in the comments below, tell us, what does justice mean to you? Your voice matters. Together, we can keep these stories alive.